Hello, ghosts and ghouls. Thank you for joining me in this video where we are going to be getting high and reading scary stories. This book was my favorite as a child. I've always loved the creepy, spooky illustrations that are inside this book. I'm sure if you're a 90s kid, you recognize this book too. I think it was in so many libraries of so many schools, which is kind of weird because there's some dark shit in here. But anyways, let's get high and read some spooky stories. I'm gonna have to turn the lights on though because I can't read in the dark. So the first story out of this I'm going to read is What Do You Come For? There was a very old woman who lived all by herself, and she was very lonely. Sitting in the kitchen one night, she said, "Oh, I wish I had some company." No sooner had she spoken than down the chimney tumbled 2 feet from which the flesh had rotted. The old woman's eyes bulged with terror. The 2 legs dropped to the hearth and attached themselves to the feet. Then a body tumbled down, then 2 arms and a head. As the old woman watched, the parts came together into a great gangling man. The man danced around the room. Faster and faster he went. Then he stopped and he looked into her eyes. "What do you come for?" she asked. And he said, "I come for you." Woo! I love these stories, they're so good. This story is called The Thing. Ted Martin and Sam Miller were good friends. They spent a lot of time together. On this particular night, they were sitting on a fence near the post office, talking about one thing and another. There was a field of turnips across the road. Then suddenly they saw something crawl out of the field and stand up. It looked like a man, but it was dark and hard. It was... Oh, fuck. I screwed that up. It looked like a man in the... It's hard to read when you're stoned. It looked like a man, but in the dark it was hard to tell for sure. Then it was gone. But soon it appeared again. It walked halfway across the road, and then it turned around and went back to the field. Then it came out a 3rd time and started towards them. By now, Ted and Sam were scared. They started running, but when they finally stopped, they decided they were being foolish. They weren't sure what had scared them, so they decided to go back and get a better look. Pretty soon, they saw it. It was coming to meet them. It was wearing black pants, a white shirt, and a black suspenders. Sam said, "I'm going to try and touch it. Then we'll know if it's real." He walked up to it and peered into its face. It had bright, penetrating eyes sunken deep in its head. It looked like a skeleton. Ted took one look and screamed, and again he and Sam ran, but this time the skeleton followed them. Then when they got to Ted's house, they stood in the doorway and watched it. It stayed out on the road for a while, then it disappeared. A year later, Ted got sick and died. Toward the end, Sam would sit up with him every night. The night Ted died, Sam said he looked just like that skeleton. This one is called The Guest. A young man and his wife were on a trip to visit his mother. Usually they arrived in time for supper, but it had gotten a little late, and now it was starting to get dark. So they decided to go look for a place to stay overnight, and they would continue in the morning. Just off the road, they saw a small little house in the woods. Maybe they went... Fuck. Maybe they rent rooms, the wife said. So they stopped to ask. An elderly man and woman came to the door. They didn't rent rooms, they said, but they would be glad to have them stay overnight as guests. They had plenty of room, and they would enjoy the company. The old man made coffee and brought out some cake. The 4 of them talked for a while. Then the young couple were taken to their room. They again explained that they wanted to pay for this, but the old man said they would not accept any money. The young couple got up early the next morning before the host had awakened. On the table near the front door, they left an envelope with some money. I lost my spot. There we go. Then they went to the next town. They stopped at a restaurant and had breakfast. When they told the owner where they had stayed, he looked shocked. "That can't be," he said. "That house burned down to the ground, and the man I tried to deliver the most boom scary part of the story, and he can't fucking talk. Alright, let's do this again. "That can't be," he said. "That house had burned down to the ground, and the man and woman who lived inside of it died in the fire." The young couple could not believe it. They were like, OMG. So they went back to the house, only there was no house. All they found was a burnt out shell. They stood there staring at the ruins, trying to understand what had happened. Then the woman screamed, "Ah!" In the rubble was a badly burned table, like the one that they had seen at the front door. On the table was the envelope that they had left that morning. Boom! Ghosts don't need money. Alright, page 47. This one is called Room for One More. A man named Joseph Blackwell. A man named Joseph Blackwell came to Philadelphia on a business trip. He stayed with his friends in a big house they owned outside the city. That night they had a good visit, but when Blackwell went to bed, he tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. Sometime during the night, he heard a car turn into the driveway. He went to the window to see who was arriving at such a late hour. In the moonlight, he saw a long black hearse filled with people. The driver of the hearse looked up at him. When Blackwell saw his hideous face, he shuddered. The driver called to him, "There's room for one more." Then he waited a minute or two and drove off. In the morning, Blackwell told his friends what had happened, and they said, "You were dreaming." "I must have been," he said, "but it didn't feel like a dream." After breakfast, he went into Philadelphia. He spent the day high above the city in one of the new office buildings there. Late in the afternoon, he was waiting for an elevator to take him down to the street, but when it arrived, it looked pretty crowded. One of the passengers looked out and called to him, "There's room for one more." And it was the driver of the hearse. "No thanks," said Blackwell. "I'll get the next one." The door closed and the elevator started down. There was shrieking and screaming, then a sound of a crash. The elevator had fallen to the bottom of the shaft. Everyone on board was killed. That's called a premonition. Alright, I got one more story for you guys. If I can find it. Where is it? This one's called The Babysitter. I would not let that child babysit my kids. She just looks creepy. I'm just going to throw that up there. Oh god, I lost my page. Oh, there it is. Let's have another toke for this last story. I'm going to turn off the light again because the smoke looks cool. Alright, that bowl is poached. Alright. Light back on. Can't read in the dark. We still got the spooky vibes though, right? I'm feeling the spooky vibes. Ooh, spooky vibes. There's a spider on my head. Anyways. I have mad fucking pasties. Whew, this might be difficult to get through. It was 9 o'clock. Yep, this is gonna be hard. It was 9 o'clock in the evening. Everyone was sitting on the couch in front of the TV. There was Richard, Brian, Jenny, and Doreen, the babysitter. The phone rang. "Maybe it's your mother," said Doreen. She picked up the phone. Before she could say a word, a man was laughing hysterically, then hung up. "Who was it?" said Richard. "Some nut," said Doreen. "What did I miss?" At 9:30, the phone rang again. Doreen answered it. It was the man who had called before. "I'll be there soon," he said, and then laughed and hung up. "Who was it?" said the children. "Some crazy person." About 10 o'clock, the telephone rang again. Jenny got to it first. "Hello," she said. It was the same man. "One more hour," he said. He laughed, then hung up. He said, "1 more hour. What does he mean?" asked Jenny. "Don't worry," said Doreen. "It's somebody fooling around." "I'm scared," said Jenny. And about 10:30, the phone rang once more. When Doreen picked it up, the man said, "Pretty soon now." He laughed. "Why are you doing this?" Doreen screamed, and he hung up. "Was it the guy again?" asked Brian. "Yes," said Doreen. "I'm going to call the operator and complain." The operator told her to call her back if it happened again, and she would trace the call. This is the days before color ID, children. You probably don't remember a day. Actually, I hope you do, because you're supposed to be over 19 if you're watching this. At 11 o'clock, the telephone rang again. Doreen answered it. "Very soon now," the man said, and he laughed and hung up. Doreen called the operator. Almost at once she called back. "That person is calling from a telephone upstairs," she said. "You better leave. I'll get the police." Just then, the door upstairs opened. A man they had never seen before started walking down the stairs towards them. As they ran from the house, he was smiling in a very strange way. A few minutes later, the police found him and arrested him. It was a bad ending. The police just found him and arrested him. Guy's an amateur. There's so many stories in this book. It's a classic. I love it. I love the pictures. I love the spooky stories. That is all for my scary stories reading. I hope you have a good Halloween. Stay safe and stay high.